Okay. No time's there. Just before I start, those who have been good enough to go to, if you're hungry, you can have my Boost bar, because I've looked at my Is It Kosher app, and yes, I really do have one, and apparently they're not, so I can't get my sugar rush. Thank you very much. I'd like, if I may, to tell you a story and take you on a journey today. So let's just quickly look back in time. How many people are familiar with the 3 laws of robotics? Not everybody. I'm always surprised by this, but then again, I thought it was a clear-cut success offering science fiction to a security conference. But basically, 3 laws, and remember them, there might be a test later on. A robot may not harm a human being, a robot must do as it's told, and a robot must look after itself. So just hold on to those 3 ideas. We will come across them later. It may or may not be apparent to many of you, I'm sure it is, that we are under attack. Cyber is a problem. When we say cyber, we tend to talk about security, all of this online living. There's one little bit of excitement as far as I'm concerned. It gets me on the telly. Whether it's the Zeus virus, nice local story because of a Salford couple putting it on people's PCs, whether it's phishing, whether it's Ashley Madison, I'm never sure whether a pink paisley cravat was a good decision that day, or of course, the famous talk. One trend that we see is that attacks are causing more and more damage, more and more grief. And the other trend, whether there is actually a correlation, I really, to my hairline, I really do not know. So we have a challenge. Many of these will be familiar to you, so no prizes, no points for spotting the various attacks and issues. All I can say is that on each case, every one causes some sort of personal tragedy. So there is certainly no tales from hotel rooms and victimless crimes. So various people over the years have come up with various solutions, and we have catalogues of what are referred to as controls. Jolly good ideas, things to do that you can actually start to mitigate some of these attacks. The problem is that they tend to turn out to be rather like these magazines that start to hit the shelves around November time, telling you 340 ways to make Christmas simple. And they get more and more and more. Remember that the organisations, fine as they are, that produce these guides, are in the business of publishing. So it's never in their interest really to consolidate. But at the same time, it's often a shame that so much good information gets lost in the midst. And this is a Jewish guy saying it, you've got to be careful to worship the objectives rather than the actual rituals themselves. I got into some hot water about some of these because most of what is done, a good deal even about what is talked about and what has been talked about here over the sessions today, have been sticking plasters. They have not been about good, strong development. And I would like to propose to you the future. If we have a negative attitude about the problems and to these controls and to these good practices, well, perhaps resistance will be futile. So let me tell you about the story of the Toynbee convector. Short story here, bear with me. Once upon a time, everybody is sitting outside in hundreds of years in the future, waiting for a time traveller to arrive. It is a time of little disease, no famine, a wonderful utopian world, and a utopian world seen and developed after this time traveller had made his trip into the future, seen this developed world after a world perhaps not like our own, where there is greed, disease, wars, famine, and any number of inequalities. Having come back with his report, he gave them a goal, and they moved towards it and created this utopian future. Of course, the time traveller never arrives. His vision was all made up. But he was basing it on Arnold Toynbee's, the historian's, idea that any civilization that does not grasp the future with positive objectives is going to stagnate and start to decay. So how did we get to this situation of stagnation and decay where we are firefighting and running as fast as we can and probably not keeping up? Marcus Raynham tells us that we are founded on 6 dumb ideas. Yes, it all seems very nice that we should get everything everywhere. Other telephone networks are available, of course. Rather than look for the few applications that we want to use, we search frequently and constantly for millions of pieces of software which we actually don't want to run. Did you know that probably for every bug that you fix, every 6 bugs that you fix, you probably introduce 1 new vulnerability? And still the public perception that hacking is this really cool thing, the bad hacking has taken over from the good idea of doing clever stuff. And every so often people will say, our biggest problem is the users. Well, it may well be, but as soon as you start talking about top 10s and biggest problems, of course, everybody starts to focus on that and tends to lose sight of what the real problems are and how they have to work and interact together. Work and interact together and pick up on the feedback and monitor and find out what's going on, looking at the dashboards, altering stuff. That's what cyber's all about. Cyber is all about cybernetics. But it's not always about jumping to action. You might think, great, fantastic, we're under attack, let's pull the plug. And of course the guys from the forensic department come up because they were just about to attribute the attack and find out how to actually stop it in the first place. So rather than the sticking plasters that we have now made a habit of putting over our systems and finding the cuts and the grazers and the vulnerabilities that we need to patch, how much better it would be if we find ourselves with a new Bible to follow and remember the objectives, that actually what we want is trustworthy software. Trustworthy software and trustworthy systems. Anybody want to define trust? Wake you up at this time of day? Trust? Anybody come across Angela Sasser from the University College London? No, none of the people are nodding here. Look up some of her work. Trust is a positive expectation that your vulnerabilities will not be exploited. Keep that in mind when you're designing systems for other people, whether their vulnerabilities, whether your vulnerabilities will be exploited. How much trust can you put in to putting your information into some of those systems? So remember the trustworthy software framework. So we've got to get out of where we are at the moment. We, of course, historically talked about boundaries, and I'm still seeing more talk about boundaries. I'm all for the basics of the 5 cyber essentials, but hey, guess what? The first of the cyber essentials is protect your boundaries. It's actually all down to the risk. It's where you are, what you're doing. Whether it's actually safe to have my phone and my laptop in a conference full of people who know to really take and exploit it. But there we go. We're back to trust again. So we want to get to a state of cybersecurity. This isn't a tick in the box. It's not a solid state. It's not something concrete which we can achieve and say, yes, we are there. We can only really be happy when we are in this cybernetic cycle of movement and understanding of the issues and solving those issues and replacing the bad stuff with the good stuff, more of which I will say later on. So when the compliance people talk about regulation, they are actually using a really good word for all the wrong reasons, because regulation should be what we are doing with our systems and the interaction. So perhaps we could introduce some very basic principles to our systems which will dampen the problem and keep it under control. Keep the problem under control rather than focusing and getting lost in hundreds and hundreds of controls that people daren't switch off because they no longer know to which risks they are associated. And of course, the more confusion that we make for ourselves, the more opportunities we open up for other people to take advantage. So how about, like I say, some guiding principles? That probably is a little bit simplistic. Having said that, it generally is the organizations and the people who have that attitude and will do something about it that mean that the issues are deflected onto people who do not put the measures in place. So there's not necessarily a bad thing. So think about the controls that can be programmed in and designed into the systems in the first place. I'm not saying it's simple. I might even give a chocolate bar to people who can spot that particular quote. Any guesses? Somebody looking at these slides earlier on said it was the Rocky Horror Show, which shame on them, actually it was from E.T., but there you go. So, yet another quote. So here we are, thousands of controls, multiplying day by day. The National Institute for Science and Technology in the States publish a basic set of controls. Theirs is about 570 pages long. The so-called 20 controls, which were mentioned earlier on, actually has 20 headings, and there are more pages and more sub-controls. So where do we go from here? Another question from you, or for you rather, another question. Who is the greatest science fiction hero? Or at least the greatest TV science fiction hero? Go on.
Doctor Who.
Take a bash. Doctor Who? Any other takers? We'll have arguments as to whether he's actually Doctor Who. I know that's his name later, but anyway. Sagan?
Sagan?
Sagan? Well, no, I always thought he was real. Never mind. It's actually Quatermass. Quatermass. There's a beautiful Quatermass story where the Earth, as often is getting zapped from outer space. But they detect this thin skin of energy around the world, which hits the places that it needs to upon the detection of certain activities. And this is almost what our cloud, and I've used that word advisedly, of controls and good practices needs to do, to be able to know where to come together. So with all of those controls, all of those ideas, is there some sort of anchor point, some sort of basic set of principles that we can remember and aim towards to maintain and develop a better cyber digital experience, a digital environment, using some of the terms that people have used today? What about going back, just in the same way that Arthur C. Clarke predicted things like satellites and others and submarines were envisaged by Jules Verne long before they were actually built? Perhaps we can learn the science fiction of the past to create some of the ideas of today. Remember, a robot mustn't harm. It's a bit like the Hippocratic Oath for doctors, that at least they should do no harm. Fine, we want to go digital. We want to digitize the system. Well, at least let's not make it as bad as the previous system. I think a good deal of our, certainly our office systems, suffer because we've never really innovated beyond the lion's tea room. It was fantastic to automate stuff, but we keep automating things and we keep automating bad things. So we don't actually get as far as doing anything really clever as improving and taking real advantage of the technologies. So what if we could create 3 laws of cyber and information security? That system, its principal idea that it shouldn't make things worse and actually should do some good. It should do as it's told. It needs to purify our water, sort out our pensions, issue money from the teller machine, make sure that the lights stay on. That's the key process. That's the key thing that systems have to do. They have to operate. And we have gone beyond the stage where we can sedately detect an attack and do something about it. Let's face it, hackers are often on our system, the bad guys, for up to 200 days before we actually find out about them. That's a long time to do damage and a long time for them to embed their working practices, their business processes within our business processes. So we need to think, when we develop and we deliver systems, that they should protect, operate and self-preserve. Never mind the controls, whether it's 5, whether it's 113, whether it's 576 pages, always going back to this basic mantra. So, what might this actually look like? Again, this is a little bit of a concept album. Quite appropriate for me, because although I am not musical, I do have more keyboards than Rick Wakeman. 3 elements to protect, operate, and self-preserve. To create a standing wave between us and the bad guys. People frequently ask me, where do they start? Well, first principle is to remember what your objectives are. And then in terms of basics, you can argue in terms of the things you ought to do, but make sure that your systems are doing 5 cyber security essentials. 5 little things. Yes, of course, there's a lot more that you need to do, and I can think of the irony of large banks, large corporate organizations standing up and boasting that they have now been tested to the 5 security essentials. But it's not whether you're tested or got a certificate, it's what you're actually doing. And from the other end, think about how you would react to a breach and how you would manage in those situations when somebody has actually attacked you, both from the social side of how you will interact and do stuff, all the way through to the technical side as well. Protect, operate, and self-preserve. Remember those principles. It even fits on a t-shirt, which is more than you can say for 27001. Sorry, I had to lose the jacket. And I decided I better put the trainers on because BSides sent me the running order. So trustworthiness is something that we should be striving for in our systems. It's almost obligatory in a PowerPoint presentation to talk about icebergs. I normally talk about Goldbergs, but this time it's an iceberg. And our mantra, our structure, our process of protecting, operating, and self-preserve, when we understand that, that's when we need to, again, take that to the threats. And there are basic things that we should do. Look at the Green Surf Code for children. Look at the Desert Island Standards for the small businesses. Take the IASME standard, which actually helps the processors and tells small businesses not put these controls in, but make yourselves secure. I am so worried by the number of organizations who are saying, we will make 27001 easy. We will make Christmas easy with 340 things to do. No, you won't. You might get them a certificate, but you won't make them secure. And this is me, the standards geek, the standards guy, telling you it's a tool. It's meant to achieve an objective. Don't worship the script, worship the objective that you want to actually reach. So there are levels. You don't want to throw the iceberg out with the seawater. No, that doesn't work, but never mind. So, standards should be like the Romans had them. A Roman standard, if you remember your history, was something that the legion would protect at all costs. And they would go through hell and high water to retrieve it if lost. It was something they looked at. If you have not discovered the magazine Cyber Talk, then please look that up. And you will find in there a story called The Battle of Rephidim. If you can find that story, read it. You will find no reference to the Battle of Rephidim, but you will find reference to these basic principles. And I would love to hear from the first person who knows why I have put that biblical reference in that particular point. So my Toynbee convector to you at this late stage of the afternoon is this. I have no numbers to put against this chart, but this is my belief. I believe that this is where we are now. We are in a period of inevitable risk. Yes, we want our phones, and we want our laptops, and we want our tablets, and we want our connection. And as soon as we have those connections, we are opening ourselves up to a certain degree. More so than less care that we might take in downloading an app which I want to use as a flashlight, but then wants access to my photos, my lists of contacts, etc., etc. So risk is something that we all need to deal with. Stuart very kindly gave you my academic CV. My coveted job is that of Dr. David Spiegelhalter. Anybody heard of David Spiegelhalter? In one of the London University, Cambridge, University of Cambridge, Professor. Anybody come across him? He has the most wonderful job title that I totally covered. He is the Professor for the Public Understanding of Risk. If we understand the risk, we can set our objectives. And we can get to this stage if we take things like the trustworthy software framework and build our future systems and amend and update our current systems on these basic principles. So there will be a time, a vision in our Toynbee convector, when these systems are able to look after ourselves. We get the right balance between the decision rights of the systems and the escalation paths through the people, be it through the communities, through the organizations, and the businesses. There is no single organization. There are supply chains. Everybody interacts and relies on other people. As the poet said, no man is an island. I think that's a very, very good model of our connected life. So, with that in mind, with that objectives, I would like you to be upstanding. Please, come on. I think, as General Patton said, there are no atheists in a foxhole. And a good Church of England education that I have had has taught me that in times of strife we should pray. So I would like you to bow your heads and recite after me. Our metadata that art in clouds, cyber attack fodder be thy name, thy nation state be backing. Thy organised crime be hacking. That was organised crime, obviously delaying the slide. In Belarus, as it is in Manchester and Sydney, Shanghai and Albuquerque and the International Space Station. Give us this day our vulnerability patches and forgive us our hasty coding as we accept apps which access more than they should. For thine is the Internet of Things, the wibbly-wobbly web of virtual worlds, until the EMP are chosen. Thank you.
Fabulous.
And you can find on the CyberTalk website all the references for this talk. And there will be stuff here as well, so thank you for listening.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Oh, and most importantly, I just remembered one last word on positive attitude. Yeah, it's a big ask. Yeah, there are big odds against us. And we always talk about 1,000 to 1 chances and things like that. So, on this particular occasion, forget the 1,000 and concentrate on the 1. I think I've given you time, so Scott's next door. Run!
Brilliant.